honored to host. I want to remind people that we can be hard on issues, but we are never hard on people. At all times, we will be respectful and kind and pleasant to each other. We will start the evening by Kathaela Tim Kolchewski formally opening our evening. And then this will be followed by 2 presentations of approximately 20 minutes each. The first one will be from Tom Reed with Nature Trust. And the second one will be a presentation from Dr. Grenz, Assistant Professor for the Department of Forest Resources Management at UBC. Then we will have 20 minutes of questions. You'll note that we have 2 other panelists who are available to answer questions. This is Sarah Nathan, Manager of Provincial Operations for BC for Ducks Unlimited Canada, and Jason Emery, Director of Conservation Land Management for Nature Trust of BC. And all 4 will be answering questions in that last 20-minute section. Hayapska to all our panelists for making the time to work on these presentations and the time for being together this evening. It is my pleasure now to introduce you to Cowichan Tribe's member and biologist and knowledge keeper, Kwatalahamuth Tim Kolchewski, who will open our meeting formally.
Ita buelio. It's an imetlat tohuimia I hunameta. Anita nut Quatmaton and the at Heleno. So I send my greetings to everyone. I use Helkamitnum, given that we're right here in Cowichan territory, talking about Cowichan Bay. And I want to raise my hands to everyone here. Take a really quick moment just to bring forward good thoughts, good feelings, and really to thank everybody for coming and being able to share on our issues. It's been a lot of work done here in the Cowichan and here in the Cowichan Valley. It's impressed me more and more over the years how we're able to in many ways lead the way for how things can be done. The level of collaboration, the amazing people that come forward, the friendships, the relationships, the partnerships have really put Cowichan on the map. We've had calls from all across the country, groups, you know, on the St. Lawrence, communities asking Cowichan, asking the Watershed Board, you know, asking government agencies how it is we're able to do all of the different things that we do. How are we able to bring back Chinook? How are we able to successfully come up with funds to answer some big issues and like climate change, you know, as far as building the weir and as far as really making a difference, you know, in our tiny little neck of the woods. So I just want to raise my hands to everyone in gratitude and respect, and thank everybody for taking the time to learn and to talk about this prominent, amazing issue. And there's big problems and with some very cool solutions, and I'm glad and grateful to be able to work on them with everyone. Thank you, everybody.
Haishka, Tim. Yeah, I didn't introduce Thomas Reed properly. Tom is the West Coast Conservation Land Manager of Nature Trust, and I will now turn, I guess, not really the floor, whatever it is we do on a webinar, to you, Tom. Haishka.
Thank you, Genevieve, and thank you for that introduction and welcome, Tim. It's greatly appreciated. I'm just going to share my screen Make sure just make sure everybody is that showing up okay. Yeah. Okay. So again, my name is Tom Reed. I'm the program manager for the West Coast Conservation Land Management Program on Vancouver Island, and I'm one of the project leads on this project. And so with my presentation tonight, what I hope to do is to discuss just an overview of the importance of estuarine ecosystems, and then go through the steps that the Nature Trust and our partners like Ducks Unlimited went through to come to the point of looking to implement this restoration and revitalization project. So to begin with, I think it's important to state what many of people have known and see on our estuary website, is that estuaries and coastal wetlands comprise less than 3% of British Columbia's coastline, yet they support over 80% of BC's coastal fish and wildlife and provide critical rearing and staging habitat for Pacific salmon and a myriad of other species. Economically, 75% of all commercially and culturally important seafood in the Pacific Northwest rely on estuaries, including Pacific salmon, clams, oysters, crabs, and forage fish. And there's been some recent research coming out of the Pacific Northwest about 1 acre of estuary habitat producing more food than 1 acre of cultivated land, just underscoring the significance, both economically and food production-wise, of these habitats. Estuaries also provide essential climate services such as pollutant and sediment filtration, floodwater absorption, storm surge mitigation, and climate change moderations. They're powerful carbon sinks with sediments capable of capturing carbon 10 times as quickly as an equivalent forested ecosystem. So this just scores, again, how important these sites are and how rare they are up and down BC's coast. In terms of what it looks like on British Columbia's coast, there's been projects implemented in partnership with many partners, including the Nature Trust and Ducks Unlimited, that have looked to map and rank the estuaries on BC's coastline to represent that 2.3% that it represents. And the rankings are class 1, most important, class 5, least important, not that they're not important, they still are. And in British Columbia, there's 8 class 1 estuaries, and the Cowichan Estuary is one of them. However, with these systems, there's a lot of threats and changes. Filling, draining, diking, and conversion for other uses, industry, residential, agriculture, has resulted in 70% loss of the original wetlands of the Fraser River Delta and 60% of the estuarine marsh habitat in the Salish Sea. And 43% of BC's estuaries are threatened by coastal development, modification, and pollution. And then adding to this is the impacts of climate change, which are expected to significantly impact the ecosystems through a number of functions: rising sea levels, ocean acidification, temperature, salinity changes, and changes to freshwater and sediment inputs. And this next slide I have, I just want to demonstrate some of these changes that have happened historically in the Cowichan. Specifically, on the left of the slide, you'll see a map from 1859 that demonstrates the complex dendritic distributary channels that were existing in 1859 of the Cowichan River and the Cowichan River, and you can see the large floodplain prevalent at that time. On the right-hand side is a picture showing present day, with the black lines representing some of the dikes in the floodplain, how it's been confined. West Can Terminal is identified there. Then there's the development of the city of Duncan and other areas. Just to give an oversight of how things can change and what historically these floodplains looked at that were so productive. So based on this, the risk and rarity and the sensitivity and importance of these ecosystems, the Nature Trust and Ducks Unlimited and our partners have focused on acquiring significant portions of these coastal lowlands throughout British Columbia. In the Cowichan from 1985 to 2018, the Nature Trust, BC and Ducks Unlimited have secured over 200 acres of land. This is complemented by acquisition that the province of BC did as part of the Cowichan Estuary Management Plan process adjacent to what we locally know as Blackley Farm. In addition to that, there was another 470 acres dedicated under the Land Act for the Administration for Fish and Wildlife Habitat as part of this overall Cowichan Estuary Management Planning process. Representing over 700 acres of the Cowichan Estuary is in a form of stewardship, conservation. And that map that I have up there shows the different types of land designation in the area. So to focus in more specifically on our Dinsdale farm acquisitions as part of that complex of lands that have been secured. In 1985, the Nature Trust and Ducks Limited acquired what was called at the time the North 40, now known as Cook's Island Marsh, from the Dinsdale family. In 1990, the remaining portion of the farmland was acquired. It's the land that everybody sees off of Cowichan Bay Road. And I just wanted, it's important for us to point out that the terms of that acquisition are laid out in the signed agreements, both in September and October, and there are no other terms of those agreements that have been signed. Excuse me. So in terms of land management, since the acquisition of both those parcels, the North 40 already had some naturally occurring breaches, and so our focus since acquisition was to do a couple extra breaches. We buried some power lines that were along West Can Terminal Road to limit migratory bird strikes, and then there's been some overall debris removal and invasive species control. With Dinsdale Farm itself, the larger parcel, over time we've constructed some field swales. There's been a wetland enhancement project. There's been nest boxes put in. Water control structure has been put in and managed by Ducks Unlimited. Then we've worked with local farm producers to continue to crop the land and plant winter cover crops. And then finally, we did work with the CVRD to create the Maple Grove Community Park that many people on this call use and enjoy daily. So with both properties, it's important to note that we continue to monitor for migratory birds, species at risk, breeding birds. We've partnered with Cowichan Tribes, BC Conservation Foundation, and others like the Simon Fraser Salmon Watersheds Lab to monitor for juvenile salmonids. And over the last several years, we've been implementing this estuary resilience monitoring tool. So with this moving into the monitoring component, given the importance of these estuarine ecosystems and threats to them, ongoing monitoring and adaptive management is critical. As partners, we're always focused on, are we using our resources effectively, efficiently? Are we meeting our mandates? Are the reasons for the acquisition still being maintained? And then overall, with the sensitivity of these coastal ecosystems representing such a small portion of BC's coast, we want to make sure that we're ensuring that our management efforts and focus is in helping these systems maintain their resilience and continue to provide those essential habitat functions for fish, wildlife, and ongoing food security. So that's where we come to this Marsh Resilience to Sea Level Rise tool. It's a multi-metric tool that we utilize that collects a myriad of data that does give us rankings for resilience to help inform those management decisions. And the output is, as you can see on this diagram or the table, is that it gives a stoplight diagram, red being poor, green being good. So with these scorings, what we can do is if we have high resilience and adaptability, we can continue using our management on preservation, maintain ecological integrity. If there's low resilience scores that come back, we start to focus on how can we facilitate transformation to secure additional lands, to remove barriers of landward migration, all focused on maintaining these ecosystem resilience. So in terms of, I know we've been asked a fair bit on what kind of data are we collecting and what is collected as part of this Marsh Resilience tool. So there's several different metrics, and this table is just giving a quick summary. So we've looked at long-term rate of relative sea level rise, and that's done by using the Natural Resources of Canada National Crustal Velocity Model. I know it sounds a lot. What that is a model that shows both horizontal and vertical land movements, so we can actually look at what's happening locally rather than on a very high level that some of these other projections use. So we utilize that and also look at the IPCC Fifth Assessment Report at different scenarios. We analyze tidal range very specifically and very discreetly, so there's data loggers installed throughout these ecosystems. We have a monitoring buoy offshore that's measuring turbidity and sediment supply, and that's complemented by an in-river turbidity logger. We have done radiometric dating of multiple cores throughout the estuary that can give us historic rates of sediment accretion and erosion going back 150 years. Now also we have different stations where we're measuring elevation profile changes to see ultimately are these estuaries able to adapt themselves with the proper sediment supply to keep up with relative sea level rise to maintain those habitat features. And then we've also done some very detailed RTK GPS elevation models. So we have a very detailed down to the centimeter in terms of different profiles of the estuary. And then there's updated vegetation mapping that's been completed as well. So this just is an overview to repeat that this is all the data and work that's been done in the estuary over the years in terms of the marsh resilience tool and collecting that data, digital elevation models created, done the juvenile salmon sampling, and other monitoring has been going on. So in terms of the monitoring results based on that, I won't go through this individually. It's there, but the key points are that our relative sea level rise estimate is basically at 9 millimeters per year. And that's an important metric to look at when we look at what's the rate of accretion. Are we able to keep up with the marsh platform? And so this short-term sediment accretion is measured at 4.1 millimeters, which is half the rate. And then long-term, using the radiometric dating cores, it's measured at 1.1 millimeter a year. So that's 8 times slower than what we're seeing in our other calculations of relative sea level rise. And in terms of estuary vegetation, which provides that critical habitat for fish and wildlife, overall, the estuary marsh area will decrease by 60% without intervention. And so using all this information, we analyzed and put into the marsh resilience tool to come up with a score for the Cowichan. So overall, the score of 1 represents lowest resilience, 5 the highest. The Cowichan, based on all our data, the 11 metrics and associated data being analyzed, the Cowichan Estuary scores 2, which means the Cowichan Estuary is at risk. So utilizing that information and the monitoring results, the next step for us was to start to work through a process to identify opportunities to enhance the resilience of the estuary. And doing this, we developed this evaluation matrix used with consultants and other partners to identify and assess different projects at the Cowichan. And this is just one of the tables that we utilized in terms of scoring resilience, certainty, land status, capital cost, constraints, etc. And that was all put into a scoring mechanism along with biological indicators to identify the top projects in the area that could help support the continuation of the ecosystem and resilience. So from that, 4 projects were identified. Everybody's familiar with this location. One was a connector channel by West Can Terminal Road. There was a sediment augmentation off of West Can Terminal Road at the north end of Cook's Island Marsh. There was the old agricultural berms that remained at Cook's Island Marsh, and then there was the decommissioning of the Dinsdale Farm Dike and focusing on land revitalization in that area. And this just gives an overview look of those different project components. If everybody can see my cursor, I think this is the Dinsdale Dike. This is the old agricultural berms. That's the sediment augmentation area. And these 2 features, this is a mitigation structure that we identified to put in. And then this is also an area that I know has been questioned about, is this a new dike or what is this component? And I just wanted to share this next map to address that. This is a planimetric view of, this is Cowichan Bay Road centerline. And so this berm area is actually just a slow grading to the height of land at the road. So it is not a new dike being built in the area at all. It's actually being looked at to support the work that Jennifer will be speaking about in terms of revitalization of the area for food systems. So with these projects identified, looking at next step for us is to go through our due diligence in terms of detailed assessments and planning, which included working with our partners for approvals, working with Cowichan tribes, looking at the Dike Maintenance Act and what the requirements are there for decommissioning a dike, engaging with the Cowichan Estuary Management Committee under the Environmental Management Act, the CVRD, Cowichan Flood Working Group, Fisheries and Ocean, and others, and also having discussions with our farm license holder. So part of that due diligence and work was to work with Northwest Hydraulic Consultants, who have a lot of experience in the Cowichan floodplain management and flood protection works. So NHC was hired to help us work through the Dike Maintenance Act approval process for decommissioning dike, and they had part of this process do assessments of both Dike 49 and Dike 88, which is the adjacent dike off of Lochmanus Road. And part of the process here that's important to note for us to follow these guidelines is that we have to, the process for approval is that we have to assess existing and future potential risks, develop mitigation measures to maintain the existing level of protection or protects against flooding with whatever is a higher level event, if it's a 10-year event, identify any transfer of flood risk and mitigate that. And then we have to also follow any flood guidelines. So in order to do that, there's a very complicated and complex process of assessment that included interpretive geomorphology, numerical modeling, and then analytical computations and developing models to assess all the different scenarios that could happen. And so part of that was the development of hydrology models, wind and wave, tides and storm surge, looking at different flood events, tide levels, and going through a very detailed assessment of what the physical processes were present in the estuary, including geomorphic history and processes, sediment input, and different models, as well as coastal models as well. And then we ran these models with all the different scenarios of infill dike removal, mitigation works, and different project components. And so just to summarize what those models and showed us was that overall with the project, as we had identified those components a few slides ago, overall the floodwater conveyance is improved. There's a lower duration of flooding in the area. The floodwater depths on all the adjacent private properties on Loch Manus Road, Cowichan Tribes Land, and some of the properties on Cowichan Bay Road, including the Cowichan Bay Lawn and Tennis Club, water levels are reduced. There results in no change to other areas. And I'll just point out with my cursor, but you can see, so the middle figure here, green is showing where all the flood conditions and depths will improve. So this is obviously Dinsdale Farm. Here's the adjacent lands, and then here's the properties across Cowichan Bay Road. And gray is showing that there's no change from present day conditions and scenarios. And this is modeled through looking at high tides, high flow events, and all the different scenarios, including sea level rise. And with these detailed assessments, including the risk of transfer, the Inspector of Dikes provided authorization for us to proceed under the Dike Maintenance Act in the spring of 2023. So that gets us to kind of the Dike Maintenance Act permitting process. The next slide is a bit of a pivot towards talk about the ALR, ALC. I know there's a lot of questions about the farmland and ALR. So the map I'm showing here is that the majority of the property is in the ALR, but the significant portions of the dike is outside the ALR. And again, with my cursor, I think everybody can see significant portion of the dike is outside. And so it's important to note that we're not making an exclusion application for the land from the ALR. We're still going to be utilizing the land for food production and revitalization, and Jennifer will be speaking about that process. We're not going to be removing any soil from the property, and so will be beneficially reused, the dike materials. And we are aware that if there's any materials that do need to be brought on, we have to follow the ALC regulation, soil and fill permit regulation. And we also have engaged with the ALC regarding what non-farm use permits are required, given the above statements. Additionally, with some of the land use decisions, we also look at our monitoring data from the 1990s all the way to present in terms of bird use of the farm and adjacent habitats. And we've been monitoring it since 92, 93, as I mentioned. And from 2015 to 2023, the monitoring data has shown that there's higher species diversity and abundance in terms of waterfowl, shorebirds, herons, and raptors, utilizing the estuarine marsh and intertidal habitat than on the farm fields. And so overall, what we're looking at is the project will provide significantly better habitat for a more diverse species group of birds utilizing the estuary. And as you can see, I did put a comment from the chair of the Pacific Birds Habitat Joint Venture, who provided a review of the project as well, and have concluded that this project definitely does significantly contribute to the sustainability of populations on the Pacific Flyway. And the other information we use is looking at the importance of estuaries for a myriad of other fish and wildlife species. So for salmon, estuaries are critical habitats for juvenile salmonids, provide essential prey resources for feeding and growth, cover from predators, and survival rates for juvenile salmonids are significantly higher in estuaries with less degraded habitat. For crabs, it's an important nursery habitat. These estuaries, habitats of different channels that are developed for juveniles, and then they'll move out as they molt and become adults. And for shellfish, estuaries are essential, provide essential habitat for clams and oysters, and they help filter pollutants out of the water and stabilize the ecosystem. And as I mentioned earlier, there is a partnership that we have with SFU Salmon Watersheds Lab with Dr. John Moore, with Cowichan Tribes and BC Conservation Foundation in terms of assessing juvenile habitat for salmonids. So where are we now? We've completed phase 1 in partnership with the Cowichan Development Corporation, which is the contracting arm of Cowichan Tribes. 900 meters of remnant agricultural berms were removed at Cook's Island Marsh, including the creation of 6 additional tidal channel openings to help create more distributary channels. We removed a lot of the debris. I think many people saw there was old dock structures and garbage that had washed up into that area. So we took the opportunity, working with Cowichan Development Corporation, to remove that debris. In terms of what's going on now and what's next, is we're doing ongoing detailed design of the mitigation structures. We're looking at distributary channel development within the farm in the winter of 2024. Elevation capital, what we mean by that is we're looking at what elevations do we have on site to help support resilience. And we're working with our archaeologists now are on site doing an assessment through the area as part of our Heritage Conservation Act permit. And then we're also working with Jennifer to development of that food revitalization plan. And we're also, just to clarify, that we won't be touching the Dinsdale Farm Dike until mid to late summer 2024. So just quickly to summarize the overall project, 70 hectares of estuary habitat. It's going to be restored and revitalized that has been diked and preempted since 1870. It's going to provide better habitat for salmon, bird, shellfish, crabs. We'll continue to produce food and contribute to the overall food security of the region. Overall flood conditions and public safety will be improved. And we're going to be increasing the resilience of the Cowichan Estuary to adapt to the impacts of climate change and sea level rise. And overall, it's going to continue to support the local and provincial coastal economy. So with that, I'll wrap up and provide back to Genevieve. Thank you.
Haishka, Tom, for that presentation. And before I introduce our next speaker, just a reminder, if you have any questions, we welcome them, and please put them in that bottom bar where it says Q&A. And with no more ado, I would like to introduce Dr. Jennifer Grenz, Assistant Professor for the Department of Forest Resources Management at UBC. And over to you, Jennifer. Haishka.
Three years of Zoom and I still mute myself. Thank you everyone for joining in this evening. And I guess I'm here today to sort of talk about our food systems revitalization project that has been underway in the Cowichan Estuary and is, growing as we go. Just to introduce myself quickly, my name is Jennifer Grenz. I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Forest Resources Management. I'm jointly appointed between the Faculty of Forestry and Faculty of Land and Food Systems, which is where I actually came from in terms of my undergraduate education in agroecology. I've been an agrologist. I've worked for a number of environmental nonprofit organizations over the years, including Langley Environmental Partners Society, where I was the agricultural stewardship coordinator, as well as the executive director of the Invasive Species Council of Metro Vancouver. So I've been, a practitioner in the field working in ecological restoration and invasive species management for close to 20 years before I made my way back to academia, feeling like, in our work, we were just not making quite the difference that I wanted us to, with all the efforts going in. And that's how I got my connections with Cowichan tribes when I went back to do my PhD in integrated studies in land and food systems in the Faculty of Land and Food Systems. I was actually going to be doing a project in my home territory. I'm in Wakatmik. My family are members of the Lytton First Nation, but I had a child that was chronically ill and was not able to be away from home much, home being Parksville, where we live. And so I'm very grateful actually for Genevieve Singleton and Nancy Turner, who facilitated the connection with Cowichan tribes. And I've been so very fortunate over the years to have been welcomed onto their territory and to work alongside them, trying to answer some complex food systems and ecological restoration and land healing questions. And I guess they're okay with me because they still keep me around, and I'm just so grateful also to have spent a lot of time sitting with their elders as well and learning so much. So yeah, I didn't have a normal tack into academia. I really say that I joke that I identify as a practitioner still. I'm also a farmer. We have a small farm in Parksville. Yeah, I think I'm a practical academic. How about that? But this is my lab, Indigenous Ecology Lab, and we work entirely in service to Indigenous communities, largely on food systems revitalization projects. So, before I get into, a bit more specifically about the project, I think my role tonight here is to provide a little bit of education about how we see land, how we treat land, how we heal land. And so ordinarily I have a little bit more of an interactive style. It's a little more difficult to do in a webinar, but I am going to run through some beautiful slides. And I just want you to think about what you see. So, ordinarily people talk about what they see in terms of the landscape. And I think one of the fundamental shifts for me that has happened, through my PhD research journey and sitting with elders for several years is that these are not just landscapes. These aren't places where we do ecological restoration. These very much are food systems. And we need to be seeing them as such, and not necessarily food systems, for humans, but whereas they absolutely are, but also food systems for our other relations, our plant, animal, insect, and bird relations. And I think applying this lens is critically important to being more effective in our land and water healing efforts. And you might be familiar with this, particular saying that when the tide is out, the table is set. Our foods are incredibly important to us because they mean culture, language, health, medicine, our self-determination, sovereignty, food security, and because our land care is embedded in the tenet of reciprocity, food is a very important a piece of that. And I think one of the things that often gets overlooked is when we think about, especially, our coastal nations, we think like, everyone was and is eating fish. But one of the things that's really important to recognize is that Coast Salish diets, as well as the diets in interior Salish, where I'm from, were more than 60% and are more than 60% plant-based. And this is sort of a bit of a misnomer people don't necessarily understand. Showing off some foods. So there's this misconception that many of our nations, or Indigenous peoples are hunter-gatherers, and this could not be further from the truth. Within so-called British Columbia, we have been managing and shaping lands purposefully since time immemorial, and we're, with the help of archaeologists and anthropologists, able to, find some of these systems again that elders have talked about and told us about, where significant amount of foods were being produced through aquaculture activities and through, what we call forest gardens and gardens in estuaries, and in this case, like the production of camas as an example in the area. Camas was an economy that it was grown extensively and traded extensively. And you have to think, we're not going to the grocery store to get our foods, and there's a lot of people to feed. And so, a hunter-gatherer narrative just doesn't work. This was purposeful shaping, coppicing, pruning, transplanting, plant breeding, all things that we know. And, Western science is now backing up, all of the oral histories that we have about this. And it's this division, I think, that happened, I kind of try to imagine what it might have been like being an early settler, showing up on our coasts, seeing land as unproductive, right? Seeing the forest as, something that you're not necessarily familiar with when you think of a food system as agrarian, right? When we think about, foods, if we're a settler, we might think agricultural land, right? Instead of recognizing that what was being seen, when they first showed up, were sophisticated food and technological systems. And I think, it's this division between agriculture and like nature that is a little bit confusing to me. You know, the more I learn about our food systems as I go and learn more from elders and, you know, spend time with historical ecologists and archaeologists and anthropologists. And I think through that kind of misperception and separation between, you know, food systems and ecological restoration, as we've kind of come up with this restoration formula that has not been terribly effective, where we're removing invasive species, we plant native species in their place, and we kind of think we're returning to this, you know, Eden, without human relationship and recognizing the importance of the management components, you know, which includes harvesting. We know that there are a number of species, including camas, that do much better, in fact, require this soil disturbance and harvesting and selection of, you know, different root or tuber sizes and all of that. And this is where our restoration has also become what's described as, you know, fortress conservation, where we're keeping people out and not having that human relationship involved. And this is where the food systems lens is so incredibly important, because this is where we want that interaction. We want people on the land. We want that reciprocity. You know, it's a lot easier to convince people to come and volunteer and help with things if what they can leave with food, you know. And so this is a lens that our lab's applying on a number of different territories, you know, dealing with some pretty significant, you know, climate events, you know, and disasters like wildfire in Stalium territory, you know, where we have these high severity fires that are essentially leaving us with moonscape. And as we're bringing these lands back, treating them as food systems. And this is something that we're doing in partnership, not just with the nations involved there, but many ranchers in the area whose cattle are out on these lands. And they are very much appreciating that we're taking this view as the land is food systems for multiple food systems. And I think this is also kind of a lesson to us, you know, what we call shifting baselines, is that we start to kind of get used to what we see on the land, and that becomes our you know, baseline. So in this case, this is the edge of that wildfire, you know, that's like very dense interior Douglas fir mostly, but this was actually not how the land should be and was, you know. So we think like, oh, this looks like supernatural British Columbia, but what it is a monotypic stand of trees, and there's actually very little biodiversity as a result, very little food, you know, or habitat value because of these high density trees. Whereas Indigenous land stewardship previously, there was a lot of use of fire to keep these areas open, more biodiversity, more food species for all relations. And these are the things that we're trying to work towards, you know, getting back to. This is a lower severity burn area where we're also learning, you know, how these food plants respond, because we're trying to create greater connection, you know, to these plants as food, because we've kind of trained, you know, not just Indigenous people, non-Indigenous people too, we've trained ourselves to think that our food comes, you know, only from the grocery store or annual crops, you know, grown, or things that we're maybe more familiar with. You know, as a quick example, I got called to the principal's office because my daughters were on a hike with one of their classes, and they were eating salmon berries as they were walking, because they can identify lots of plants because they have to come and help me all the time. And they were told to stop. And they were like, well, why? And they're teaching their friends and identifying plants. Well, they might get poisoned. And so there's a little bit of education there. But for me, that was a real check that, like, we're walking our dogs through these areas every day, and we're not seeing, you know, the original farmed plants as food here anymore. And so we really need to be providing that kind of education. And, you know, this is, again, where I touched on earlier in the fire zone, is that, you know, our food systems, traditional and agrarian, really do coexist and have very much shared values and goals if we can, you know, begin our conversations that way. And so it's been a great opportunity for us on this particular fire to work hand in hand with ranchers who want to see a lot of the plant species that Stalium Nation also want on the land, because they benefit biodiversity as well as the cows, as well as people. And so in terms of our own project, you know, working in food systems reclamation and revitalization, you know, we're kind of used to seeing, Cowichan food system, or in terms of like seafood, or in terms of what might appear in what are often referred to as Garryoak ecosystems, which really are bulb farms. They're starch source farms, what was quite exciting is that I got a phone call from Diane Hinckley, who's recently retired from Cowichan Tribes, the lands and research, I think manager. I don't want to misrepresent that, but she's like, I got a plant emergency. You got to come down to estuary. You're not going to believe this. There's camas in the low intertidal zone, and it's everywhere. And we don't know why we haven't noticed this, but come on down. So down I come, and of course there's camas. And then it was really funny because there were a couple of elders walking along Knipson Road, and they're like, what are you looking at? We're like, well, we're looking at the camas. Isn't this crazy? And they're like, well, duh, this was part of our seasonal food system. And so we were harvesting up in the higher dryer and then moving down into the estuary, when it became drier. So we have a constant source of this, like, huh. And so that led us to working on a project to understand and map, where the camas is in the estuary, as well as other culturally important food plants and other and plants for other purposes as well as mapping the invasive plants to get a sense of what is there and identify where we can utilize plants in terms of nurseries for the rest of the project, and helping to revitalize these plants as food that is available, to both Cowichan people as well as, the community at large. And these are some of the examples of plants that we found, like Pacific silverweed. There's tons of crabapple and Nootka rose. And then the bottom left corner is the invasive yellow flag iris that we need to figure out a solution to as well. So what does food systems, revitalization look like in this context? Well, this was a gathering on Salt Spring Island with Cowichan elders and knowledge keepers, as well as with Saanich knowledge keepers and elders, and other folks involved in Garryoak ecosystem restoration, applying that food systems lens, learning about how, some of the struggles that Camas is having today, because of that lack of harvesting, and what the potential of it is, in terms of having it be more of a primary food source, and trying to learn or relearn all of these land stewardship techniques that go with it. So far we have done drone mapping of the area. You may have come past and seen us on Knipson Road. We met lots of folks, and in fact the Integrated Remote Sensing Studio, which is a lab in my department here at UBC, helped us out with the mapping, which included actually students from the area, like Tristan Douglas. So that was kind of great to have, people who grew up on the estuary, helping out with the mapping of this project. And so, sorry, I'm just going to move things out of the way so I can see my slides. So yeah, we did LiDAR, multispectral, and RGB mapping of the area, and then have been working to create plant identification systems to identify where all those culturally important food plants are, as well as the invasive species. We're also working on some models to evaluate plant health from the air as well. We were working on identifying some of the archaeological features with that mapping, and then again, identifying plant nurseries and seed sources and areas for cuttings for the rest of the project, so that we honor what we call plants in place, as we know that very specific genetics are in these places to be adaptive to those conditions. And then we spent a lot of time also, sharing with elders and knowledge keepers and learning more about estuaries as food systems, and what the land practices are and what kind of plant densities and all of those kinds of things. And we've also been engaging with ethnobotanical works and ethnographies in the area as well, to kind of understand a little bit more about what was there, when the early settlers had arrived, like just trying to put together a complete picture. And so, a lot of this work is a very large interdisciplinary team: archaeologists, knowledge keepers, soil scientists, I work on plant soil interactions and soil microbial ecology. And we've been guided by Dr. Chelsea Armstrong, who is a historical ecologist who has done a lot of work on the indigenous forest gardens that are being found across so-called British Columbia, where the plant species compositions are completely different from the periphery forest, and are really close to village sites. And so we're doing a lot of work with different nations on reclaiming and revitalizing those. We're looking at the archaeology right into people's hearths to see what they were eating, floating seeds, looking at them, and basically what's that's doing is there's a significant land indigenous food systems revitalization effort across the province at the moment. We just had a gathering 2 weeks ago in Haida Gwaii. I think there were more than 10 nations represented, and it was all about collecting seed germination, which is something that my lab works on, learning more about these native plants that we've really taken for granted, that we don't, we just think they're there and haven't really engaged with them and know as much as we do about agronomic species or even weed species. And so these are just some of the seed collection projects that we're working on elsewhere, and engaging youth and students in that work, which is what we will be doing again with the estuary project. This is just some of the firework as well that we're doing. So just to wrap up, again, what does this look like in other locations? This is Kitsilus First Nation, and this is about what we call bridging food systems together. So their community garden has agronomic species growing alongside a number of species that we would consider native. We're learning more about how to increase their production beyond what our kind of shifted baseline of thinking, what they produce now because they've been neglected for so long versus what they can produce. And it's actually been absolutely incredible to see, like, completely loaded salmon berries with a totally different growth habit. And so these are the kinds of things that we want to be putting in place in the estuary. And then, there's a lot of supporting documents coming from different nations as well about, growing food, reconnecting with foods, and how we can grow these at a larger scale, so that these foods can be part of our local food system. We've been through a lot in terms of inflation and supply chain issues, and so, how do we set communities up to have a stronger local food supply that is just including foods that we ordinarily would consider to be, forest plants that maybe we've never paid attention to before, that have a lot of potential. And so just to show you, I've got the last few slides here. I don't want to go over my time, but this is being implemented in a number of agricultural settings right now, including UBC Farm, which we're converting. Our plan is to convert all of the hedgerows at UBC Farm to indigenous food systems, one to diversify food production, but also because now we have a lot of science as well as knowledge from nations about their impacts to biodiversity. There's significant increases in biodiversity, increases or improvements in soil quality and soil processes. So increased water retention and increased nutrient content, increased carbon storage. So like these ancient forest gardens that we are finding again with nations just have clearly are much more resilient and biodiverse. And there's a lot of interest from farmers that I've been working with, both in the Cowichan Valley, but also in the Comox Valley, and then at UBC Farm, which is why we're putting this in as kind of a demo there as well, on how do we improve farm resilience and farm diversity. And then there's a lot of interest as well in, how do we engage in food systems reconciliation as well as farmers on land. And so, a lot of them are also interested in providing access to, whose Indigenous communities whose land they're farming on, to be able to, more easily access some of these foods as well. But then also a number of them are interested in, how do we commodify some of these and gain interest in and things like some of these berry species that have been growing alongside us all this time. So this was last week. We're out there today for hours, and we'll continue doing this at a larger scale as we go. I think we put in over 600 plants and 100 pounds of seed. And UBC Farm is an organic certified farm. And so, we've been navigating that, but there's a lot of interest what we're doing, and we're going to be running workshops with interested farmers, also just again because of the interest in terms of building, diversifying their available foods that they're growing, but also building in these resiliency pieces so that we can have beautiful food to eat like that. So thank you so much. I hope I've, provided some interesting content, things to think about. And I just want to thank all of the people that have been part of the generation of this knowledge, like Genevieve Singleton, like Tim, and thank you so much. Aishka.
Aishka, Jennifer, for your presentation. And just a reminder before we move to questions that we've got a lot of questions. That's super, and not a lot of time. I've been advised we're going to go over on time a bit. I'm not sure how long, but I'll get the word on that. And also that any questions that don't get answered, you will get an emailed response to. So the first question I've got is for Tom. Tom, when talking about monitoring results in regards to the RTK drone data, is that photogrammetry or LiDAR?
Yeah, so with the, it's a good question. So it's a combination of both. So there was photogrammetry derived elevation models and interpretation with corrections to the RTK drone. And there's also been LiDAR enabled drone flights as well, similar to what Jennifer pointed out that her UBC, I can't remember the full name, the Spectral Lab. So there's a combination of both been utilized in the development of the digital elevation models and the interpretation.
Thank you, Tom. I have another one for you, Tom. What is the sea level rise specific to Cowichan Bay?
Okay, I'm just going to pull up. So the calculation for Cowichan Bay is relative to sea level rise estimated to be 28 centimeters by 2050 and 78 centimeters by 2100. So that's when I referred back in my presentation to the 9 millimeters per year and how that's equivalent to that. We really need to look at what the rates of accretion are to make sure that the estuary marsh habitat's able to keep up. So that's the up-to-date information we have, and we're always reviewing any new information that comes in to update those models. Oh, you're on mute.
Thanks, Tom. Aishka, for that. I'm keeping you on the ball here, Tom. I've got another one for you. Who is doing the archaeology, and has anything been found?
So in terms of the archaeology of the project, there's been a few phases. So we did an overview assessment, and all the archaeologists that we've worked with have been working closely with Cowichan tribes and have been recommended by Cowichan tribes. So there's been an archaeological overview assessment that's been completed. And then we have some consulting archaeologists through, I think it's Millennia Research, who are also working on doing the archaeological investigations now in terms of now that the last crops are off the farm, going through and looking at different areas there. In terms of anything been found, that'll be something that'll come out in the archaeological reports. But I do know historically, and Tim or Jennifer can speak better to this than I can, that there is a lot of village sites and a high diversity of use that's been prevalent in that area for generations.
Thanks, good, Tom. Jennifer, what protections will be in place to stop anyone from harvesting the plant and shellfish food sources?
I can't speak to the shellfish stuff, and I think these are further conversations that we need to have. But generally, we're trying not to practice things like fortress conservation, and the hope is to have increased engagement with people as well, through harvesting activities. But that's a kind of further down the road discussion to have as we go.
Aishka and Jennifer. Sarah, can you please share what Ducks Unlimited Canada's role is in this project, please?
Yeah, sure. So Tom in his presentation went over habitat securements that have been done by the partners over the years. And so Nature Trust and Ducks Unlimited together purchased the property that is now got the Dinsdale Farm on it. Ducks Unlimited is sort of like the junior partner in that arrangement. Nature Trust did the acquisition and Ducks Unlimited contributed, I believe it's 27% of the acquisition cost. So we are partnered in the project. We also believe that this project is best aligned with our mandate for estuary and wetland conservation and restoration in Canada and in British Columbia.
Aishka, Sarah. Another question for you, Tom. Has there been any discussion with the CVRD, Cowichan Valley Regional District, regarding future trail development to replace the trail that is being currently used and will be lost due to the restoration?
Yeah, so I think I do want to recognize that in my presentation with the Maple Grove Community Park. It's highly valued. I know most people park there and will continue on to the Dyke Trail. So part of our engagement with the CVRD started back in May 2022 with engaging with senior management, with parks, planners, general managers, talking about the overall project in terms of support from the CVRD. So that started quite a long time before we did the announcement. And part of the discussions we're looking at what opportunities does this project have to support any regional trail and active transportation networks in the area. There's been talk in the past about a trail from Cowichan Bay linking into Duncan. And so we've looked at this as an opportunity, is how can we still provide access in interpretive opportunities. And I know it's something that we've talked about as a project component that may be really nice to have as part of what Jennifer's talking about in terms of food systems and having an interpretive trail that connects through still portions of the farmland as well. That's still there. And then we've also, I know there's a viewing platform that people like to go out to at the end there. So we're looking at relocating that viewing platform to Nature Trust property off of West Can Terminal Road. So there'll still be an opportunity for people to get a higher bird's eye view, if you will, of the estuary. And then there has been some follow-up initial discussions about how can we as partners, all of us, contribute to helping with that regional trail network and either improving some of the trail conditions on West Can Terminal Road with some of the industrial partners in the area, and still providing that access and connection for the community to the estuary for wildlife viewing, photography, hopefully in the future, food system, plant harvesting, etc.
Aishka, Tom. Jennifer, where will the shellfish be on a map of the field? And where would the salmon be?
I am the person of plants, so I'm gonna pass that off maybe back to Tom because he's enjoying talking.
So I think one thing with the salmon, so part of our design project is that we looked at a lot of other researchers that had been done. Like there was an individual, Greg Hood, who's from, I believe, Oregon, who's done a lot of work in terms of channel allometry, which is basically channel dynamics. And so we actually utilized a lot of the data from there and did a whole analog marsh analysis for the Dinsdale Farm project to look at what can we expect in terms of distributary channel development and habitat supply. So once that's further defined with those two, I think on the map, there was a couple of larger channel things there. So we modeled that as basically a way to promote channel development based on our analysis, and then we'll get a further staging out of different classes of channels. So we're expecting there to be significant improvement in terms of off-channel habitat, juvenile fish habitat, in terms of cover, food, prey resources, etc. So that'll be interspersed throughout this the land and interspersed with the work that Jennifer's looking at doing. You're on mute again.
Yeah, sorry. Just to clarify, you mentioned about Maple Grove earlier, but I just got this question I want further clarification on. Would Maple Grove remain untouched and intact in perpetuity?
Yeah, so I think that's with the old maples there, that is something that we haven't made any plans to remove the maples. We know they're well established and they have a very healthy population of lichen on them and other plant resources. So we're not, there is no plans to remove the maple grove at this point.
Thank you. Further one for you. Who will benefit from this project?
So that's an interesting question. I think in terms of the benefit is I think the overall community will benefit in terms of resilience of the ecosystem, identifying that we all have shared values in terms of clean water, healthy habitats, food systems, food security. So I think overall the benefit will be to the overall population and community in the area. And then as Jennifer mentioned, including the other relations like fish and migratory birds and insects. And I think that's from a perspective of the beneficial relationship there. I think overall in terms of maintaining the ecosystem and the resilient capacity of it to support, like I mentioned, 80% of coastal fish and wildlife, 75% of commercially significant seafood harvesting. Like there is a huge benefit to maintaining the resilience of these ecosystems, which are only 2.3% of BC's coast.
Aishka, what is the sea level rise to date, Tom?
Holy. I might have to answer that question in a follow-up, just because I'll have to do a separate calculation since we based our calculations. The sea level rise projection was based on the start of our calculations in 2019 moving forward. So I'll have to follow up on that one to give the exact number.
Okay. Question from one of our attendees. I just want to confirm my understanding of what Tom said re flooding. Engineering studies have indicated that this work will reduce flooding in adjacent properties. Is that correct?
Yes.
All right, moving forward, will there be adequate sediment replenishment, Tom, for the restored marsh habitat to sustain itself? And how would that work?
Do we have an hour? Anyway, so with the
No.
so yeah, I know. So part of our coastal modeling and processes that we've been doing, and NHC has also been doing this with Cowichan tribes on part of, there was 2 breaches that were done on West Can Terminal, looking at sediment dynamics of how they're moving across. And it's a very dynamic system, as everybody knows, with that slide I showed with the training dikes on the river. There's been a lot of work upstream that is starving the sediment supply to the Cowichan. And so part of it is looking at those rates of accretion. And so when we say we're looking at the elevation capital in that one slide, is that we're looking at what is the rate of accretion and erosion that we've modeled and that we've got the data for, and do we need to bring in material over time to replenish it to still maintain those ecosystem services? And that's definitely linked to the higher discussion or larger discussion in the watershed about sedimentation and flow regimes. And I know Tim at that top talked about the weir, and so it's pretty much is all interconnected. But in terms of the overall monitoring of the project, one thing that we are committed to that I mentioned that the organizations that I work with in terms of the adaptive land management is to have a very robust, detailed monitoring plan that will monitor all these different metrics in terms of, are we actually achieving our goals? What do we need to do? Do we need to intervene and add more material? And there's a lot of projects up and down the Pacific coast that are looking at this exact issue.
Thank you. Will sediment accretion impact biofilm, Tom, that may exist in the existing estuary? Could that impact shorebird success?
So I think with the biofilm, I know there's a lot of focus on the biofilm at Roberts Bank. That's been in the news a lot with Rob Butler's had a lot to say that on that subject in Environment Canada. And so in the estuary, in terms of our vegetation mapping, there's a huge area of mudflats. And with our modeling in terms of how we're looking at the estuary moving, so there still will be an adaptation of the mudflats that support the biofilm. And so what we're actually part of the project is to, I know we reference coastal squeeze that can happen if we don't start looking at these potential projects to allow landward migration, is that landward migration also enables the continuation of the mudflat ecosystem that has the biofilm that supports, hundreds of thousands of migratory shorebirds.
Aishka, how will flooding be mitigated through the project if the farmland is flooded?
So part of the, as I mentioned off the top there, part of the provincial guidelines for decommissioning a regulated dike, there's certain conditions that we have to demonstrate to the inspector of dikes as the regulatory decision maker, and one of them is to demonstrate that we're not transferring risk. So that's where all those detailed modeling assessments and physical processes assessments were done by Northwest Hydraulic Consultants. And so overall, the project with the modeling that I showed is showing with the mitigation of that one setback thing. I think I showed it at the one thing, and all the modeling with that raising of the land a little bit, not building a dike on Cowichan Bay Road, but just that gentle sloping is that mitigates for all the different scenarios that we modeled for.
Tom, will there be a role for volunteers during the restoration program?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's come up before. So when we're looking at our large physical works with equipment and machinery, we have to make sure that we're maintaining a safe working environment. So in certain cases, there with that big heavy equipment, there won't be. But in terms of the ongoing monitoring and then the work that Jennifer's looking at, there's going to be lots of opportunities to engage the community, to help with the project, to help with citizen science and monitoring. It's something that we do up and down the island and other locations where we work with naturalist groups and volunteers and school groups to engage the community, to actually get out on the ground and make those relationships and connections, and to help out and help us with the actual planting of plants and monitoring and the restoration components. So I think a lot of those opportunities moving forward, we'll be able to identify those through our community connections, and we may also have an opportunity to put those kind of opportunities on our website page.
This is really great. Thank you to all the presentations. And I was wondering if this recording was posted publicly. I'd love to share. Yes, for sure. I can answer that one. This is being recorded and it will be shared. I would think that we'll call it a day here. I know there's many more questions, but they will be answered. And the presentations have been interesting. Appreciate everybody's hard work here, the respectful questions from our many attendees. Last count I looked at, there was 112 people on, so that's fantastic. And take a look at the website, lots of information there. And any other points I should be bringing forward, panelists? All right, well, Hayapska to everyone, and Ice Night. Good evening, and much appreciated everyone's hard work. Great job.